Well, hello and welcome to Between the Forks, the official podcast from Clark Material Handling Corporation. Since 1917, Clark has been at the center of material handling, building the very first forklifts and setting the standard for innovation, reliability, and safety. But this podcast isn't just about their history. It's about where the industry is today and where it's headed tomorrow. The goal with Between the Forks is simple. We want to give dealers and buyers the knowledge they need to make smarter decisions. We'll dig into the myths, challenges, and opportunities in material handling, and we're going to share practical insights that you can actually use on the job. Think of this as your inside track to understanding forklifts, but from the experts who actually know them best. For our very first episode, I am really happy to be joined by a total expert, and that would be Brandon Bullard. He is the Vice President of Sales at Clark. Brandon leads all of Clark's commercial business, overseeing dealer sales channels, the dealer development, and national accounts. With more than 20 years of experience in the industry, he's helped companies plan smarter, strengthen partnerships, and adapt to the changing demands of material handling. In today's conversation, we're going to explore the DNA that still drives Clark after more than a century. We're also going to tackle some of the most common myths around forklifts and look ahead to what the next decade holds for the industry. So let's get started. Welcome, Brandon.
Glad to be here, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Well, of course, this is going to be fantastic. Episode 1, couldn't be more excited. And I want to start at the beginning, which is, I don't think most people know in the world of forklifts that Clark actually invented the first forklift all the way back in 1917. I want to start there and just kind of get your thoughts on that, maybe a short version of that story or in general, what that means to you.
Well, I think you asked the question correctly. What does that mean, right? So there's the story, and then there's how does that influence where Clark has been and where Clark is going. A lot of people don't know that it is a very diverse marketplace now, but in Battle Creek, Michigan, in 1917, the Clark Corporation was making drill bits, and a buyer for the Army saw a cart that they basically created, a motorized cart to maneuver and to deliver materials within their manufacturing facility. And they said, I want that. Sell me lots of that. Clark built that. The first forklifts didn't even have forks on them. That really launched an industry as we went from World War I to World War II. And Clark became the brand that helped feed, build, and defend America over the entire last century. For that period of time, a forklift was a Clark. If you ask your granddad about the forklift he drove in the Army or, in a summer job, he'll tell you it was a Clark. They were all green. And so that really is seminal to the idea of what we do now. And it's an interesting, unique identifier of this brand. And what I mean by that is, Clark is iterative over generations, literally generations of people and generations of the product. It's been the first brand to develop, of course, the vertical mast, the forks themselves. In 1956, Clark developed the seatbelt. In addition to overhead guards to protect from falling objects, Clark patented the seatbelt. They gave the patent away to our competitors because they felt that safety was more important. Lives were more important than profits. And this has been a company that's cared about people since its inception. And when you make a product, you make the same thing for over 108 years. What happens is you take something good that works, that's durable, that's proven, and what the opportunities that present themselves from an engineering standpoint and from a customer deliverable standpoint are continuous improvement incrementally over generations. Sean, I saw an article last year I'm really into cars, and it was showing side-by-side comparisons of the statistical quality and warranty claims, things of that nature, of different car brands, which is interesting. We all drive a car, most of us, and you're looking as consumers to buy what will have the best. What are you looking for, right? Uptime. You don't want things to break down, and when they do, you want them to be fixed quickly, right? That's what we all want. And what stuck out to me was this article was pointing out that Porsche, over a long period of time, had really been the same car. And that's something I actually don't like about Porsche. As a car enthusiast, I don't love the idea that they all kind of look the same. But it really struck me. This article was talking about the fact that Porsche has been the same car, slightly modified through German engineering, year after year after year after year after year. And that has made them very, very good at quality. Clark is really parallel to that story as really the original forklift that has become better and better over the course of 108 years. You have that same iterative benefit that is delivered to the customer. Most importantly, in things like we pick things up and put them down. And Sean, a lot of people think a forklift is a forklift. Some customers, some dealers think, yeah, they all lift, lower, and leak, just different colors. And the customer doesn't care. That's not necessarily true. That uptime matters in actual real dollars and cents to that end customer. And that ability to safely lift the load without tipping, without exceeding the capacity of the forklift, that matters when lives are on the line. And they often are in material handling. It's very important. You may not think, Sean, about a forklift. They're often the size of a golf cart in their footprint on the ground, and yet they weigh more than your pickup truck does. So safety really matters. And a big differentiator for Clark is the capacity retention. So when you see a common 5,000-pound capacity forklift that you might see next time you're at Home Depot or somewhere, right, or a lumber yard, you'll think that thing picks up 5,000 pounds. But if you look at the safety data plate on most brands, it'll say 4,650 or 4,700. It's a roundabout. And the physics that come into play with forklifts, as you raise those forks lifting your load, or you have longer forks that extend out, right? That physics dictates that you decrease the capacity of the forklift as you raise the load. And that can become problematic if you're lifting something that is around that capacity. Clark, for example, like our most popular model, the 5,000-pound, we just said vanilla forklift out in the world, it's actually 5,000 pounds. As you raise it all the way up to, say, 189 inches, which is the most common height, still 5,000 pounds. So capacity retention is a massive differentiator for this original brand in the marketplace.
Yeah, so much to unpack. I mean, you buried a lot of leads there, Brandon, which is it's amazing because I really appreciate, and I bet you the audience for this content and everything that you're sharing will matter to them. But I'm glad to hear you say, that if a forklift is just a forklift, then essentially it becomes a race to the bottom. Like everyone's just going to buy the cheapest thing out there, which also means quality, right? There's no way for you to have, all of those things, right? Good, better, best, fast, quality, all those things together. There's a lot to be said for that. And I think because of that history for Clark, when it used to be, you mentioned that it used to be, your grandparents, our grandparents' generation would say, it was a Clark. Everything was a Clark. All forklifts were a Clark. But that also means that there's a lot of DNA that's been out there for a long time, and there's probably some of that still exists. And you were sharing some of that. Do you think when you're talking about the capacities of a lot of the people that you compete against, is that part of, for you, that original DNA that still sticks around, that from the very beginning Clark kind of set out to have a standard of quality so that the customer base has an expectation that's legit on things that are? You mentioned safety and seatbelts. You mentioned the capacity to be safe at these, you're not shying away from the 5,000 pounds is 5,000 pounds. It's not 4,600 and you guys are rounding up. But do you have other kind of thoughts? I'd love your perspective on maybe those original DNA components of Clark that have been around forever and are still here today in the way that you guys design and build forklifts.
Well, that's a fun question, right? So I've been in this business and others for some time, as you mentioned, out of the gate. But when I joined Clark 4 years ago, what really excited me was the fact that the patent for the forklift is on the wall here, right? That's pretty exciting. And some of those things that we could get into some of the more boring details. A lot of people say, well, my forklift, a lot of brands that are out there say, well, it's got this widget or that widget. And some of that kind of flies over the customer's head. But going back to that DNA that you talked about, some of those original designs, like the nested I-beam mast, is how the mast is the vertical piece of steel that lifts, right, the carriage with the forks and of course, the load on it. That nested I-beam concept is seminal to how Clark accomplishes what we talked about a minute ago. And so, being a company that was involved in every aspect of our society, like I said, whether it be construction or military or anything, that forced this brand to innovate. It forced this brand to build designs that would stand the test of time. And we've seen that. It's a much more, as you mentioned, diverse marketplace now. We could talk about what's happening there. But those same designs, exactly as you so cogently put forward there, those carry forward, and we haven't changed them. A lot of people look at what we call value engineering these days. If you get in a new car, you'll find the same brand is interesting looking year after year, but you'll notice cheaper materials. You'll get in and you'll notice the thinner plastic, right, in the dash or the door or whatever. That's not something we do here. That's not something that we have at any point since the beginning till now endeavored to do. Clark builds the most durable and heavy-duty design. Everything from when we could bore you with things about the steer axle to the thicker frame to why that mass is important, not only to accomplish the capacity retention we talked about, but as well as safely lifting the load, side shifting at height and things of that nature that do matter to safety. So you're right, that let's call it that approach to engineering is the basis, the foundation, if you will, that this business is built on, this company is built on, the industry is built on. We have a museum at Clark. We call it our history hall. Then you can see a lot of interesting things. The first time I visited our museum, what stuck out to me as a professional in our industry was that it wasn't the history of Clark. It was the history of our industry, because our industry is Clark. Mm. It is in the DNA of the industry. Things that you see on a common forklift today, Clark was the first one to do it.
Mm. Yeah, so there's so many things that you're sharing that I think are really critically important for the consumer, however you want to define them, that's considering could be like, hey, we've had a particular brand of forklift for a long time in our operation, but maybe we're looking at something different. It both encourages people that know about the Clark legacy and why the Clark brand still matters today. It also, I think, is very important for people who are trying to amass new knowledge and what's current and what you're sharing. I mean, there were a lot of people that through supply chain disruption and constraints through the COVID era that made a lot of these and justified through that these, let's just call it a decline in quality in whatever way they could find it. Some of it was because of shortages. Some of it was also just because it ended up becoming convenient, where a company is going to look for easy places to become what they feel like might be more profitable. But at what expense? And what you're talking about is we don't compromise those things. There is a way to do it, and there's a way not to do it from the Clark perspective. I think anybody that really cares about and understands that this type of equipment isn't the kind of equipment that you should ever shop for, of where did they find some places to cut corners and, how their product works, what it's made of, how safe is it, how reliable is it. We'll get into some of that stuff later as in this conversation, but really great to hear you share all of that. Let's talk a little bit more about history, because you're already laying out innovations being first, commitment to, quality, these kind of things. I think that those, for me and for people that there shouldn't be, but there are people that maybe don't know a lot of the background of the Clark story, and they probably maybe might be for the first time hearing how Clark really was an innovator from the beginning. what's an innovation today that you feel maybe it's one that's been around for a long time, but is there something about Clark's innovation that you think has deserves more attention than it gets?
Wow, it's hard sometimes to distill down an answer to a big question like that. We have a history like this, both from an engineering standpoint as well as a go-to-market strategy, dealer partners across globally around the world, with what really is a global icon, an American brand for sure. That's rooted in that legacy. We were really proud to launch and unveil our new global headquarters here in Dallas, Texas, where my office is this year. And it was exciting to see both those partnerships that have been around, as well as, you asked me about product, all of that here for folks to see. We invited 100 and, gosh, no, I think it was almost 400 dealers were here from around the world to kind of celebrate that moment here with us. We, as you probably can imagine, have manufacturing and dealers and customers worldwide. And you asked about those product innovations. That's been a continuous thing. We talked about seatbelts, we talked about masks, we talked about forks, things of that nature. As the advent of warehouse products and electric forklifts indoors to serve the needs of the massively growing e-commerce or distribution of food, things of that nature, that power our economy here in the United States and around the world, Clark had to continue to be an innovator in that space. So a lot of people may not know. You think of the vanilla forklift, you think of this iconic brand, you may not think about all of the warehouse products that we offer. We have the full line. And so customers are looking for things like, when space constraints, Sean, inside of a warehouse dictate that your shelving that you put pallets on are closer together, you need things like a narrow aisle reach truck. That's a stand-up forklift that can go really high in narrower spaces. Clark was one of the first to develop those, and we have a really nice product there that reaches over 430 inches in height, and you're seeing now 500 and 600. So we're in the process of developing the next generation of that truck that will reach even those heights for customers. Ergonomics is a big thing. One thing I've noticed that's a differentiator for Clark from the get-go is standard features. So for many of our competitors, you will find that some of these innovations that might seem simple but are important are an additional $500, $800, $1,000. And let's dig into a couple of those, right? I'll give you a couple of examples. So ergonomics matter. If you're going to be on a forklift the entire day, it really can be injurious if it's not ergonomically appropriate for the operator. So you may not realize a forklift doesn't have a suspension. They don't have a suspension. They carry a load, so there is no give. Where the opportunity for that arises is in the seat. You can put a full suspension seat on, like you might see in an 18-wheeler. And for our competitors, they will make that an optional additional upcharge. And when customers are buying at scale 100 forklifts or 500 forklifts, it's easy for CFO or bean counters, if you will, to cut things like that out, right? Because you talk about that race to the bottom. So that $500, $700, $800 seat gets left off, and in the end, that has a downstream effect. So what's Clark's solution to that? Well, every Clark comes with a full suspension seat. There's no additional cost. You look at things like headlights. Headlights are simple, and you have them on forklifts going in and out of containers and 18-wheelers. A halogen bulb is old technology and standard on every forklift. An LED will last you nearly forever and is another $800 for most of my competitors. Zero for Clark. So these standard options matter when you're building something that people are going to use day in and day out. And we make sure that those end users have that because it's built right in. And that goes back to value. When I say we don't value engineer, we don't reduce the amount of steel, we don't reduce the weight of these things so that we can get the price down and get the get our margins built up. We don't do that. We do build additional value for the end customer beyond just what it does every day. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, you're kind of chapter and verse doing a really great job of helping people understand these points of value that tie to the history of Clark. I say this a lot of times. It doesn't really matter the vertical or who I'm talking to. This applies both in life and business. Experience is oftentimes the biggest differentiator in a scenario. I'm a broken record, literally. I say that all the time, but I say it because it's true. And you can apply that to, selecting your brain surgeon, the guy who's done it a million times, the guy who's done it 2 or 3 times. It doesn't make the guy 2 or 3 times that he's not competent. But you're going to want to go with the forklift company that, they invented it and they've never compromised since 1917 on how they build them, how they continue to actually push value over all of these other things that could easily take over from a corporate mindset of, hey, well, we also need, why are we throwing in a seat that we could make an extra $800 off of? For me, as a guy who's like, I'm not a forklift expert like you are. I've driven some. I've worked in environments where I've been on them before. The first forklift I ever was on in the company that I was at, actually the first one was like lift truck kind of, like you hold with your hands. But both of the forklifts I was on as a younger guy in warehousing were Clark's. And so as you kind of share this, I love that you're giving that historical value perspective, but also you were talking about quality. And the next thing I was going to ask you, even you already kind of started to answer around that helps Clark stand out from competition. Again, you're really kind of, I think, painting a really good picture for how, they're not all the same. And for people who are wanting to understand in more depth the type of information that helps them around decision making, this is what's critical to know those things, like the why Clark does it the way they do and how they continue to do it in the manner that they started out doing. I think all that's really important. I want to ask you something that now speaks a little bit to that reliability factor, because people love the experience, the history, the remaining dedicated to how we build and why all of these things matter. I think people really love it when you continue to push value over profit, keeping the standards high. And the next thing that somebody that's wanting to know about Clark is going to be thinking of is like, well, how reliable. So I'm curious to know if you could share a story, maybe a Clark that's still running decades later. You know how people talk about, like, I've got a Toyota truck and it's gotten 1,000,000 miles or 500,000 miles. Maybe even one that surprised you or your team.
Well, I'll answer that question 2 ways if that's okay with you. I think
Sure.
the Clark that is still running today, that is decades old, is something that everyone who has been around forklifts at all has stories about. You'll find them everywhere, anywhere that you'll find equipment like that. The Clark is the continuous perennial, if you will, in our industry. So those trucks are out there, and here's the kind of evidence of that. Why don't I answer your question this way? Clark prides ourselves as one of our differentiators is the people. We are not a publicly traded company. We're not going from quarter to quarter trying to meet some sort of special metric there. We take the long view as this kind of father of the industry. And what that allows us to do is make the right decisions about how we design these things, as you talked about. And it also makes the right decisions around people. Clark is accessible. That's our superpower. One of the things that everyone says, whether they're an employee here, whether they're a vendor, a partner, a dealer, or a customer, is Clark picks up the phone. If you call us, there's a person that you can talk to. Right, who speaks English, and that is, or whatever language around the world, right? That's a differentiator for us. In our parts department, there are human beings answering the phone, pulling up. We have designs going all the way back to 1917 to sell parts. Customers are buying parts for still running 1965 forklifts every single day at this business. And,
Wow.
and that's proof of what you said. So that's more than one Clark that's still running. That's literally, and I saw this stat the other day, millions of Clarks that are still running. And we provide parts for those trucks every day. You asked about maybe an example of that differentiator. I visited, my role is in sales. So I visited a customer, a potential customer with a sales rep that asked me to join a conversation with a customer that really stands out in my mind as evidence of what we're talking about. This customer was using another brand. And the customer said, I'm happy with this brand and it does what I want it to do. And I like the product, but I'm also very interested in talking to Clark and I want to understand the differences. Well, any company can talk about their widget. I've told you about some of our widgets and our, things, and customers, I think, get a little confused about that, and they also maybe don't have time to become an expert on every engineering aspect of a piece of equipment. They want to go with a trusted name they know, right? Which is something that Clark does so well. But in this specific instance, I noticed that this customer bagged concrete in their gravel yard as I pulled in my car. Had concrete dust everywhere. It was all over the place. And so we talked to this customer about what they liked and they didn't like about their current equipment. I asked them about the steer axle. And they said, well, we only change the steer axles kind of the normal amount of times. It's kind of a common thing. And I said, well, how common is that? 2 to 3 times per year per forklift. Whoa. Now, let me tell you why I asked that question. Many of our competitors will use something called needle bearings in the steer axle, right? That's the wheels on the back of the forklift that turn. Those needle bearings can get what you might call gummed up or grind up with some of that dust that can make its way into that axle. And that is very expensive to replace. That's a big cost. Clark has a much more heavy-duty cone bearing that's built into that design. That cone is really intended to allow when customers do something that they probably shouldn't, but happens, overload the forklift or bounce the rear end, which you never want to do. But if they do, that cone allows that flex that preserves the steer axle and preserves the equipment. And it's a long-held, very heavy-duty design. Guess what else it doesn't do? It does not get gummed up with that dust that you'll see with most of our competitors in their design. So in this specific application, the customer was able to switch to Clark's and really save thousands and thousands of dollars on every unit in their fleet every year. And so we talk about value versus cost, and you talked about COVID and supply chain, some of those challenges. We've really seen it is a diverse marketplace globally and here in North America. We've seen a growth massively of Chinese brands that have entered our marketplace. And I believe very much that let the customer decide what's best for them. And I believe in competition. So I have no problem with that. But they have attacked the bottom of the marketplace. And customers who needed something, dealers who needed something, many of them have adopted some of these new entrants into the marketplace. And here we are in 2025, you're seeing the hangover from that. And let me define that hangover. The designs are not to the standard that we just talked about in that example with the steer axle. The design, the heavy-duty nature of a Clark is not built into some of the lower cost options that are out there. Even from some of our mainstream competitors, not even the lowest priced ones, they don't take that same approach that we do. They're looking more at the short-term dividend to the shareholders, not the long term that a century-old brand thinks about. But parts support. Remember, I just told you the anecdote about our people physically answering the phone. Right now, you can pick up the phone and call Clark and say, "I need a part for a 1965 forklift," and get it. These new entrants into our marketplace, I did not give a lot of thought to parts support. They didn't think about distribution of parts and support for the product, having a robust team that has the ability to keep those machines running. And you're seeing this hangover a couple of years later after that happened.
That's very interesting, but I think that's a really important point. I know you're not coming from a place of where you're throwing shade or disparaging your competitors, but I think it's really important, especially when you consider how the Chinese enter lots of different markets, but certainly with forklifts, material handling. But I can't imagine, although maybe there are some people that would use the justification of buying something that's made in China that let's just say it's some kind of light for your office, or okay, fine, you're probably going to find a better deal, and the quality of that item may not matter as much. There's not as much significance, or I should actually use the word consequence, to something that might be let's just say a forklift. The quality, and kind of you're speaking to that and being, I think, very professional and kind in the way you approach that. I think that's says a lot about you as a person. But I think it is something that people who are either learning about Clark for the first time, they are remembering Clark because they do have some legacy attachment to the brand and they remember it. But certainly for people who are, no matter where they are in that journey of how do I understand the differences between this brand and their product, and newer people who have entered the marketplace, I think that's a place where a big flag needs to be put in the ground of whatever the number is that number worth the consequence of safety and quality and experience and all of these things that we've kind of talked about, like the history, the reliability, the safety, the commitment to continuing to provide really high level in terms of value. And that value is literally what you're sharing as we talk through this, things that are tied to quality and to safety and to experience. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. This is just me, my opinion. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to compromise any of those things when you're considering, hey, we need to actually make a forklift purchase, whether that's one for a smaller business or it's multiple for a fleet. An anchor point should be who knows this? Who has the greatest history? Who isn't cutting corners? Who isn't trying to enter the marketplace as the low price leader? Like, if you want low price leader, then consider that when you're buying groceries. Maybe where can you get a gallon of milk the most affordable, or something like that. But certainly not in something that requires a lot of consideration around safety, quality, reliability. So, not to take over too much on that point, but I hear you saying a lot of things that I think are really, really, really important. And I don't see how anybody would justify to their company or to their employees, we decided to buy this very consequential piece of equipment, matters the most, but we compromised on safety, reliability, quality. That it almost sounds like you would have to not be thinking correctly from a business perspective, but also just the consideration of what's best for our people and for you already mentioned it, people matter to Clark. I think if people matter in any kind of business, they probably are going to align themselves with the values of brands like Clark for a lot of reasons. So I want you to help me maybe bust a myth. Let's try to bust a myth. In every industry, in every vertical, there are myths. You will certainly know these ones in this vertical much more so than I will. I'm just your conversation buddy for these episodes. But let's try this one first. Is it true in the forklift world that used is always cheaper when you're looking to buy a forklift?
That used is always cheaper? Well, I guess technically that's the case. A used forklift would be. It really should go back to and to your point a minute ago about safety and about that actual deliverable value, right? It's cheaper isn't cheaper. Not only is it not as safe, it also isn't cheaper. It really should start with the customer's application. In fact, it's very interesting to me. I mentioned I love cars, and I've been asked. I've been in sales my entire life. Why don't you sell cars? I'll tell you why. For customers, a car is an emotional decision. So you might qualify the customer and understand what they're doing with it. They say, I've got 5 kids, you need a minivan. And then they show up in a 2-seat Corvette the next day because it's an emotional decision. A forklift is not an emotional decision. It's something I love about it. It is very much determined on understanding the customer's application and what are you trying to do. So good forklift, really professionals, and you could say salesmen, but I don't think you ever sell anybody anything. I think you understand what they need and you provide solutions. So a good professional that's doing that understands what is the customer trying to do with this thing, right? What is their goals? What are their goals for both physically, what are they doing? What are you lifting? How high do you lift it? But also in what environment? What are your fleet goals? Is this a 2 forklift operation, a 100 forklift operation in multiple locations? Is it electric? Is it propane? Is it diesel? Why? What are your energy needs? Is it 1 shift, 2 shift, 3 shift, right? What kind of operators do you have? I'm telling you this for a reason. Used is appropriate all the time for the right customer, just like a used car. So, of
Hmm.
course, and our industry is used as an important piece of that business for our dealers and for end customers,
Hmm.
but typically not your large fleets, right?
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
nothing wrong with it. It's just for the right customer at the right time.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I'm kind of reading between the forks a little bit here, where, you're kind of saying without saying that on its face, purchasing a used forklift, may actually be cheaper by the dollar, but it may not be, depending on if you're trying to get something that's just a few years old. It may not be if it's out of warranty, if there's warranty consideration. It may not be in terms of its maintenance needs. You just gave in a previous answer a really, really great actual story from I think it sounded like it was a prospective client, but somebody who's dealing with concrete and all of that dust, and then how that ends up becoming a factor. And for people that are going to consume this podcast, this kind of information, they're probably going to know what that would look like if you've got concrete dust flying all over the place and then you don't have a way of making sure that you're keeping that kind of stuff clean. But what if the used forklift that you're buying wasn't properly maintained 2 to 3 times a year, that you're having to particular address that piece? You can see how that would be, and I kind of hear you saying that in that long run might just be 2, 3, or 5 years of ownership. It might actually end up costing you a whole lot more, to where you could say, gosh, we could have bought a brand new forklift. Like, so there is a lot of consideration. And I love that you point out the fact that this is an objective decision for people to make. It's not, I fell in love with a Bronco, because its redesign is super awesome, or, whatever.
Yeah.
I love that contrast between car buying and, something like a forklift, because it really is 2 different mindsets. It's a different headspace. And I think people need to understand that for sure.
You talked
Uh,
about myths, like what myths are out there. There's a ton of things that people don't necessarily know, customers don't know. They're looking at what is the right energy solution for my fleet, for your indoor stuff, your warehouses. Most people don't know. This is actually an interesting conversation piece. EVs, if you will, have been around for 100 years. Clark made some of the very first electric forklifts. Now, they use a great big lead acid battery, but we're seeing the conversion to lithium batteries in that space. So the adoption of electric forklifts indoors is almost ubiquitous. You're seeing that everywhere. But that now is translating to outside. And so for customers, what are some myths about it? An electric forklift won't do what my diesel forklift will do. Well, the next time you're looking out your window driving down the road, Sean, look at a locomotive, a train going down the tracks. Did you know those are electric? They have a great big diesel engine there, but that diesel engine is a generator. The electric motor has the ability to generate more torque than anything else. And they've come a long way. Your brushless AC motors in an electric forklift require virtually zero maintenance over the life of them. And I'll give you a simple example for customers. You talk about myths, right? We're having a lot of conversations around cars, around EVs, but in the forklift game, we don't have range anxiety where the next charger is. The charger's right there on the wall. Forklifts don't leave the yard, right? Or they don't leave the building. So we've gone much further down that road generationally than other industries have. We 5 years ago moved into a house on a really nice property that we liked. The house has been around for 30 years. So the home was built in 1996. We made some changes, but one of the things that was still in this house, Sean, were the ceiling fans. Those ceiling fans, and I live in Texas where it's hot, my wife runs them around the clock, right? They run around the clock, 24 hours a day for 30 years. They're not broken, and they don't make a sound. They're not squeaking. How many oil changes have they had? 0, right? How much maintenance have they had? 0. In a house full of fans. These electric motors really are incredible, and they have the ability to reduce the overall cost of maintenance in a way that people don't think about. So there's a lot of things in the conversion to EVs for outdoor equipment that you're seeing a massive change. Ports are interested in it. Large customers are interested in it. Multinationals are very interested in it. Environmentally conscious folks are interested in it. There's regulations around it. We're seeing that develop and play itself out in like industrial vehicles. But the maintenance, the moving parts, it would shock you to see that the actual maintenance costs are 30, 40, 50% less. It's really around the battery. The right energy solution, the right battery, and right charger configuration for your application is necessary that someone that knows what they're doing helps you with. And the maintenance of that battery can last a very long time. And with the newest batteries, the lithium batteries that Clark offers and others, you can now see the battery outlasting the forklift even and going into the next forklift, which is something people have anxiety around. You talked about what are the myths, right? Oh no, if I buy an EV and the battery goes out, I've got to buy another expensive battery. Well, we're early in that journey. We are. So making assertions is a little tough. What we've seen so far and what the models are built around, the financial models are built around pulling out that battery and putting it in your next forklift, which is really interesting. That's really interesting. So your cost to maintain these things and really even the uptime, right? The time it takes to fix them. There's nothing moving in them. Sean, if you think about the engine under the hood in your car, you know how many thousands of moving parts there are that have to be oiled, greased, right? I had my oil changed yesterday. A brushless AC motor, a traction motor in a forklift, that's just a magnet and a coil. There's nothing, like I said about the ceiling fans in my house, it'll go around and around and around for the rest of your life and mine. There's no moving parts. There's no transmission. Think about the parts in the transmission. There's nothing. Now you can say, well, you've got computers, and I don't want to switch to an EV because of computers. I'll worry about that. With cars, I can understand that anxiety. But just like cars, forklifts have computers either way. So an internal combustion engine forklift has multiple computers on it already. So you can't escape that. So really, you have your hydraulics either way. You got a whole lot of steel, but you've got an electric motor, computer controller to control it, and a battery. That's it. So think about those four things versus the, oddly 2,000 to 3,000 parts of an internal combustion forklift.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's really good. You actually did a brilliant job there of actually, you kind of almost knew where I was going to go next, because I wanted to understand a little bit about that myth of like, hey, can electric forklifts really compete with the older, or the standard kind of propane, the diesel and all that? But you handled that pretty well. And then you also kind of talk about that maintenance myth, which I had not thought about that the same way, and it makes a lot of sense that don't frame your EV knowledge or understanding simply around the automotive vertical, because there's so many key differences there. And I think that's another thing that's a big factor for decision making is like, what's this going to end up costing me in maintenance? It's not even just what brand am I going with, but am I buying electric? What's the power source going to be? Which is great. Let me ask you this about myths, in case there is one. I don't know if there is one or not, but I'm just going to throw this in. Is there a forklift myth that you wish would just disappear forever? Like something out there you're like, this is a horrible one.
Yes, if I had to have a wish, and I think this is really true. I often say this when talking to people who are professionals in our business. I wish that the idea that they all lift, lower, and leak in different colors. A forklift is a forklift is a forklift is a sentence I've heard people say. And I know people believe it. I know people who sell forklifts that believe that. And to a degree, that's probably true. And I would say to you, if that were true, a power drill is a power drill is a power drill. A washer and dryer is a washer and dryer is a washer and dryer. I don't know about you, Sean. Do you have a Billy Bob's power drill in your garage? Whatever brand that you're interested in, you probably care about the longevity of their ability to deliver that product and stand behind it, right? So a warranty is only as good as the company that stands behind it. So stop and think about what that means. That myth that this commoditized product, and it really is, forklifts have become hyper commoditized. That is the myth that I wish would go away. And I tell everyone, especially those who are sales professionals in our business, who are, let's call it solutions providers to these customers, whether you're selling Clark or you're selling a different brand, and I think for Clark it's especially important, understand what your customer is doing with this equipment. What are their strategic goals in material handling? That's moving stuff. What are their growth goals? What are their challenges? What are their operational challenges? Right? What are those things? And then provide them the best equipment if that's ours. And most often, I believe it is. Understand why. In the example I gave earlier with the steer axle, why is our equipment specifically the right thing for them, and what specific problem does it solve? That's what I mentioned in the example earlier with the steer axle and those needle bearings versus Clark's cone bearing. Understand that and deploy it to solve customers' problems, whatever you sell. And that's the myth I wish would go away, to answer your question, is the idea that these are all the same. Because if they were, and this is, I'll give you a bold answer. Let's throw a bold answer out that no one ever thinks about, both to our dealers and our end customers. Here's a wild one. Clark has the ability today to make a bottom of the market forklift. So we have factories around the world. We have engineers around the world. We could design a cheapo loco forklift if that's what they want. That's not what we want. That's not what customers want. That's not what our dealers really want. They care about the engineering that goes into these things. But if people, whether it be salespeople, sales professionals, or end customers, don't take the time to understand those differences, then all of that is for naught. Right? So that engineering time, that holding to that design, that literally thicker steel that costs a lot of money, that delivers something for that customer. If no one is paying attention to that or articulating it, then all of that is for naught.
I love that. Great answer. Great insight. I couldn't help but think about, I drive a truck. I'm not going to share the brand. Doesn't matter. What does matter is you could say the same thing. People could say the same thing. Like a pickup truck's a pickup truck, right? It's got a bed of various sizes, depending. You might have a dually because you might have a ranch or some other. Maybe you're working in the oil fields, whatever. But there are people that would make that kind of argument of like, just pick whatever brand you want because it's all going to do the same thing. You're going to buy the size bed that you need. If you need a super cab or whatever, right? People could say that. If you need a V8, if you need a big diesel, if you need whatever you're doing, just for, and you could correlate some of that thinking, some of that, I don't know, it's not really an argument, but maybe that positioning to forklifts. But what we've been talking about on this episode is actually the differentiators. That would be experience, history. That would be safety. That would be quality, not compromising. That would be, this thing actually does go up to 5,000 pounds. We're not like 4,650 or whatever, like cutting corners and where we're at. All of that stuff is consequential. It matters significantly. And so it isn't just a truck's a truck, a forklift's a forklift. It's like, okay, I get it. Yes, it can pick things up and raise them up. And okay, oh, we're within 400 pounds of what you say. Like, oh, no, there is a place and time for, I guess, compromise around standards, safety, reliability, quality, history, who's done it best, who's done it the longest, who knows what they're doing, who has all these legacy stories. And I think all of that really, really matters. And I think emphasizes the point that all you could say about things being like, well, they're the same. They're only the same in terms of, well, what do they do? Not how they do it, not why they do it, not if they can be relied upon. Those are all really things that you've been talking about in this whole episode that I think become really clear, powerful differentiators when you're thinking about the value of Clark, its brand, its product, and the why behind all of it. So let me take you to a little, just got a couple things before, we'll wrap up our conversation today. But when companies are buying forklifts, because it's a process and we're talking about some of these things specific to Clark's value today, but I am certain that there are probably mistakes that can be made when people are trying to evaluate and make that decision. So when companies are in that forklift buying, place, what's the most common mistake that you see, operations teams and, the decision makers make?
Most common mistake. Well, I hate to repeat myself, but I would say it goes back to exactly what we talked about a minute ago, not understanding um, the true nature of the actual application and what challenges are there and how the equipment fits into that space and solves that problem, both the individual piece of equipment or the fleet and the solutions at scale. So let's talk about that for a second. So you asked me common mistakes. Inside of a warehouse, for example, it's actually really complex. People would think it's not. A forklift is a forklift, right? But you really need to understand every little inch. And these things are configurable, so you may not know that. Forklifts are ordered to spec. They're ordered to the specific specifications that are needed for that customer. And when we build them 2 inches too tall or 2 inches too wide or things of that nature, they don't fit into a customer's application. So that's a common mistake that I see, not truly understanding that. But it's also the energy solution or the financial solution. So let's talk about fleets at scale. Are we understanding the customer's true need of 2 or 3 shifts? Let's go back to electrics, which are common in that space. Are we sizing the battery the right size? They come in different sizes, right? Do we have the right charger? Chargers, it's very interesting. Batteries have come a long way, but the chargers have gotten smart. What they're able to do, they're getting smarter all the time. They understand, they measure the temperature and the energy needs of the battery. And then here's a common mistake. Are we taking care of the battery? If a forklift, an electric forklift, for example, has very few moving parts, I mentioned to you a minute ago, taking care of the battery is the number one thing. That's your number one exposure to cost there. So are we doing that to make sure that battery lasts the full life of this forklift and maybe even another forklift? That's the most common thing that I see. When I ask customers what they're doing there, they aren't really understanding that and paying attention to it. Or let's talk about the lease, for example. Most forklifts are under a financial instrument like a lease, especially fleets. They might think, well, I run 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. I need a 5,000 hour lease. We get asked that a lot. And the reality is a true power study, which you actually go to the customer's application and you can put a tracker on their forklift to understand how much energy they're actually using. You can understand how often they're charging it. But guess what else you find out? How many hours they truly run. While your operation might be running around the clock 6 days a week, your forklift isn't actually moving that entire time. So when you structure the lease to the right, let's call it right size it for their use, their actual use, it saves the customer thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of the 3, 4, 5 year lease of that equipment. So right sizing is important. Now, we haven't talked about technology at all today, but we probably should, if that's okay with you. Fleets, as I'm talking about fleets, we talk about what customers need to think about. Are they understanding where these forklifts are, how they're being run? There is so much technology now, and Clark is investing in that. We're investing in, for example, Clark Smart, our telematics. Why do you need telematics? Do you need to know where the forklift is? Most people think that, it's a GPS tracker. It's a nanny system that tells me who wrecked it and when. Sure. But the reality is these tools allow you to manage your fleet. It allows you to control who can operate it. A truck driver can't back up to your dock that is not either OSHA certified or approved to drive your forklift. They can't jump on your forklift, right? They can't badge in and drive that forklift. That matters. You can control that. You can track it. You can understand your fleet better with really affordable and simple tools. And not all of our competitors have made that a priority. Clark has, whether it be the Clark Fusion lithium batteries, that solution that we offer, the Clark Smart telematics. These are some of the most really important decisions for customers and important factors that go into those decisions. People are buying differently these days. We talked about how much does it weigh and how high do you lift it. We talked about that. Customers, you and me included, are buying forklifts differently. They have tools now they didn't have before to help them understand and manage their fleets at scale. And that's something that Clark is investing in.
I love that. I love it. That sounds like you also kind of one of the last things I wanted to ask you that's a good answer for it, which is as you kind of look ahead, what are some of the things that are coming up? It doesn't necessarily have to be before the end of 2025, but 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, definitely. And if you've got some other thoughts on this, I'd love to hear from you. But just as you prepare for the future, and you just dropped some stuff there that I hadn't thought about. And again, I'm not the forklift expert, material handling expert. You are. But I understand it, and I've certainly worked in places where I have used these types of products. And I think all of the way that you're kind of helping people understand kind of nuance, things that are really important around decision making, just you continue to lay out a lot of great reasoning for people. That the thing that I love about it is just it's logic, it's reason, and it's logic, and it's really, really important. So people they think through some of those things. A common mistake I hadn't even thought of as you're talking about is, the advancement of not just battery technology, but charger technology and what this might mean. That could be a huge mistake for somebody who it really wants to go the electric route, but they haven't really, you're going to get what most people will give you as kind of the surface level. And what you're sharing here is there's much more to making these decisions that you have to go a little deeper on, so that you don't get 6 months in or a year in, or certainly in a premature ownership status where you're like, man, what did I do? And that doesn't necessarily just show itself in the first few months after you own a forklift or a new fleet of forklifts, right? Costs go way up if you're making a fleet decision. You got to make a really smart one based on all these factors. So just love that you're just dropping so much great stuff. Let me just ask you this. It's a last question. If you have thoughts on what I just mentioned, which if there are other things that you see coming in the future, whether that's a few years, 5 years, 10 years, that you want to share, feel free to do that. Also, in addition to that question, we've been talking about this and referencing it quite a bit in this conversation. If there's somebody that's listening to the podcast today and they're comparing Clark to other brands, is there one thing that you'd want them to take away about Clark? What is that thing?
Well, those are a couple of great questions. Where are things going and what we want people to know? I think that when you're trying to make a tough decision around your equipment, we talked about some of the technology and what you need to know, and you need a trusted professional. Understanding all the widgets, which I've shared some of ours, and our competitors will throw out, I've got this or I've got that technology as well. And that's good. And I'm glad we as a business are charging forward. But you have to go with a brand you trust. Remember, I said a warranty is only as good as the company that stands behind it. So one of the things that I'm excited to share with you both in talking about the future and answering your question are the fact that we are in a very exciting time as here at Clark. We're talking about turning the page on the next chapter of this exciting legacy of this American iconic brand. And what that means is massive investment in new leadership, new products, in people, in partnerships. We've got new dealers coming on, in technology. So we're able to do that because we are leaning forward. So this conversation has partially been about where we've been, but you're asking about where we're going. And I think that's the right question to ask. Where is Clark going? Is this your granddad's forklift? And it's not. If you take a look at it, what do I want people to know? Full line of products from one end to the other for every one of those applications. That technology, that investment is happening. And it's a really exciting time because we're on this exponential growth path as we, as I said, anchor our brand in credibility with a whole new generation of buyers that might not be familiar with Clark, right? They might be new to the marketplace and trying to understand. And so it's important to talk about where we're going. And you asked where are things going and what do I think will change 5-10 years down the line? The electric forklift is something that is not new. And the expertise of this industry as a whole, and Clark specifically, is well rooted. So we have a lot of products that are coming out this year and in the following years to serve those large-scale port customers, lumber yards, with electric products that you wouldn't think would be at home there. and we're finding that they are. So you're going to see the growth of that and the importance of technology. Pedestrian awareness is something that is becoming more important, and we're working on new products in that space so that you can avoid pedestrians with forklifts. And technology, AI, facial recognition, all these things are baked into improving your ability to do so and deliver that safe product at the end of the day. You know, in my first week in this business, somebody showed me something that was interesting. I saw a demo of a Clark forklift, and they asked the customer to lift a load, a full heavy load, all the way up with a competitor brand and side shift that load. You can side shift, right? Forklifts go up and down, they tilt, and they side shift. And you watch that vertical mass we talk about sway, and it was very scary to watch. Side shifting the Clark next to it, completely solid. From the wheels, the foundation of the actual frame, the thicker steel, and that nested I-beam mass that make the difference, it was solid as a rock. And that gave confidence to everyone there in Clark's ability to not only do the job day in and day out for generations in the past and generations to come, but to do it safely. And that matters to the end customer, because at the end of the day, everybody has to go home safe. And that's job one for all of our customers and for Clark too. And that's built into the DNA where we started this conversation of this brand, and it carries forward into the future. You know, I'd like to share with you, Sean, while I've got you, on who is this company. We talked about the DNA, right? We talked about 1917, right? And that whole thing. Clark is a family-owned business. We're privately held by a family, and we talk about people and family mattering and being around for generations. We're not going to be sold. We're not going to be, what we call value engineered, costed down, every little penny. We really care about the longevity of this brand and carrying it forward as we, as I said, turn the page on this next chapter of an exciting legacy.
I love it. I love it. I have to say, all credit to you, Brandon. We've raised a fantastic first episode, but now it's time to set it down. So, to the audience listening and or watching, we've explored what makes Clark unique from the DNA that we've been talking about that's been with Clark since the very first forklift to the myths that often trip up prospective buyers, the future trends that are shaping the material handling industry. We're covering a lot of this content, and this won't be anything but the first of many conversations where we'll start to dig into some of these things specific, starting broad so that you really get an understanding of past, present, future of Clark brand. The mission with the podcast is to educate, to empower dealers and buyers. So whether you're managing a fleet, you're evaluating your first forklift, planning for the future of your business, we really want you to have the insights and confidence you need to make the best decisions. That's with the product that you may already have on hand and all of the things that you might decide that you need in the future. If you found today's conversation helpful, we'd love to hear from you. Make sure you follow or subscribe. If you're seeing this on YouTube, definitely hit subscribe. You can also jump into the comments so that you won't miss future episodes as we continue to make this content. We're going to continue to bring you stories and strategies and perspectives that are straight from experts, thought leaders like Brandon at Clark. If you're not already, let me also highly recommend that you follow Brandon Bullard on LinkedIn. He posts a lot of great content there. And you also want to, because it's easy to do, follow Clark Material Handling on LinkedIn as well. You'll get lots of up-to-date information there. You'll also see clips from these conversations in those places. And last but not least, thank you to the audience. We appreciate your time and never want to waste it. So we appreciate you spending some time with us today, and we will see you again really soon. Thanks.